Just 48 hours before his death, Charlie Kirk said he was done following Israel's agenda, and then he was shot dead. Was that just coincidence or something darker? You think America has free speech? After watching this, you might change your mind. One joke from Dave Chappelle revealed who's really speaking freely and who's getting paid to stay silent. On one side, Dave Chappelle, who can't be bought. On the other, Charlie Kirk, accused of taking millions from Israel. And when he tried to break away, he ended up dead. So who's the real hypocrite? One joke at the Saudi Comedy Festival sparked global outrage. But the real story wasn't the joke, it was Charlie Kirk's secret, revealed just 2 days before his shocking death. The people attacking Dave Chappelle for free speech are the same ones taking foreign money to stay quiet. This story exposes their real face. On October 3, 2025, Dave Chappelle made an appearance at the Riyadh Comedy Festival in Saudi Arabia. True to form, Chappelle couldn't resist wading into controversy. While on stage, he cracked a joke about conservative commentator Charlie Kirk, saying, "Right now in America, they say if you talk about Charlie Kirk, you'll get canceled." I don't know if that's true, but I'm going to find out. The crowd laughed and applauded, but his remark quickly stirred backlash online. Chappelle also noted that it felt easier to talk here than it is in America, a comment that rubbed many people the wrong way. Critics were quick to jump on Dave Chappelle after his remarks at the Riyadh Comedy Festival. Many argued that he had no business mocking America while standing on a stage in Saudi Arabia, a country where comedians must negotiate exactly what they are allowed to say. To them, the irony was glaring. Chappelle accepted a paycheck from Saudi organizers, carefully tiptoed around local restrictions, and yet used that same stage to take a swipe at the limits of free speech in the United States. Commentators like Tim Pool seized on this contradiction, calling it hypocritical. At first glance, the critique sounds fair. If Chappelle is willing to censor himself in Saudi Arabia, then how can he claim the moral high ground when it comes to America? But the issue isn't as simple as critics want it to be. In fact, the deeper you dig, the messier it gets. Because while Chappelle is being accused of double standards, some of his harshest critics, figures like Charlie Kirk, have long been entangled in similar, if not greater, contradictions. Charlie Kirk, one of the most prominent conservative voices in America, has faced his own scrutiny over ties to foreign money. For years, Kirk has been an outspoken supporter of Israel. He often speaks with glowing admiration about his visits to the country, calling them life-changing experiences. He emphasizes his spiritual connection to the land, praises Israel's role in defending what he calls Western civilization, and insists that the United States must stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel against common enemies. On the surface, his message is one of conviction. But behind that rhetoric lies a trail of financial influence that raises serious questions. Reports and rumors have circulated for years suggesting that Turning Point USA, Kirk's influential conservative youth organization, has received significant funding from Israeli donors. Some claims, like the allegation that Israel once offered as much as $150 million to boost his operations, remain unverified. Still, the perception has stuck. Kirk is seen by many as a man whose politics are shaped not only by ideology, but also by the checks being written to support his platform. Critics argue that his unwavering loyalty to Israel is less about principle and more about financial dependency. And this is where the double standard becomes clear. If it is hypocritical for Dave Chappelle to accept money from Saudi Arabia and then comment on America, why is it not equally hypocritical for Charlie Kirk, or others like him, to accept money from Israeli donors while presenting themselves as defenders of American sovereignty? The outrage toward Chappelle begins to feel selective, especially when those criticizing him are themselves entangled in foreign influence. Even more telling are the consequences of speaking out. In America, you can criticize the president, the military, or the government without losing your career. But criticize Israel too loudly, and suddenly doors close. In some states, contractors are required to sign pledges affirming their support for Israel before they can work with the government. Content creators have been demonetized, deplatformed, or silenced for questioning the extent of Israeli influence on U.S. policy. In other words, the very same people who lecture Chappelle about free speech often ignore the fact that genuine free speech on this issue doesn't really exist. This tension came to a head in the final days of Charlie Kirk's life. Reports suggest that just 48 hours before his death, Kirk told Turning Point colleagues, Jewish donors, and even a rabbi that he could no longer continue aligning with Israel's agenda. He allegedly declared that he was done being pressured, that he refused to be bullied into compliance, and that he was ready to stand on his own terms. Some even claim he hinted at reuniting with Candace Owens, another conservative figure who has been openly critical of Israel at times. Then came the shocking twist. Kirk was killed shot in the throat, just days after signaling his break with Israel. The timing fueled speculation, with figures like Owens implying that his death was more than a coincidence. While there is no hard evidence to support those claims, the whispers only amplified the sense that powerful interests punish those who step out of line. Meanwhile, Dave Chappelle's crime was far smaller. He didn't pledge loyalty to any foreign government. He didn't accept years of funding from overseas donors. He didn't use his stage to push a political agenda. He simply made a joke, an insensitive one, yes, but still just a joke. And yet, the outrage directed at him has been louder than the scrutiny placed on people who have built entire careers off foreign backing. This is what makes the backlash feel hollow. The problem isn't really Chappelle. The problem is the selective outrage, the way critics choose when to call out hypocrisy and when to stay quiet. If money from Saudi Arabia taints Chappelle's credibility, then money from Israel should raise the same questions about Charlie Kirk and others like him. You can't have it both ways. At the heart of all this is the issue of free speech. True free speech means the ability to criticize any government, any leader, any policy, without fear of losing your livelihood or your life. But that's not the reality we live in. What we see instead is a system where comedians, influencers, and politicians are pressured, rewarded, or punished based on the positions they take. Some are offered bags of money to toe the line. Others are silenced when they step out of it. And that's what makes Chappelle different. For all his flaws, for all the groups he has offended, he remains one of the few voices who cannot be bought. He speaks his mind, whether people like it or not. That independence terrifies those who thrive on control. Because when someone cannot be purchased or silenced, they become unpredictable, and unpredictability is dangerous to people who rely on influence and money to keep the system running smoothly. So yes, Chappelle's joke was controversial. Yes, it may have been poorly timed. But the outrage toward him says more about the critics than it does about the comedian himself. In a world where so many voices are bought, borrowed, and bent to fit someone else's agenda, Chappelle stands out precisely because he refuses to play the game. And maybe that's why the attacks on him have been so fierce, because he reminds us what real free speech is supposed to look like. Critics, including political rival Nick Fuentes, have long alleged that Charlie Kirk's organization, Turning Point USA, benefited from large sums of Israeli funding. The figure often cited is eye-catching: $150 million supposedly offered to expand the group's influence. Whether or not that number is accurate, the claim itself reflects a much larger suspicion that stretches across the American right. Many conservatives believe U.S. politics, particularly within their own party, has been heavily shaped by the interests of Israel. This idea isn't pulled from thin air. American foreign policy has, for decades, aligned closely with Israel's goals. Military aid flows steadily each year, diplomatic support remains unwavering, and politicians from both parties frequently emphasize the unbreakable bond between the two nations. For critics, the closeness raises a fair question: how much of U.S. policy is driven by American interests, and how much is influenced or even dictated by Israel's priorities? What really fuels this debate, though, is not just international aid, but the way support for Israel shows up in everyday political life. In certain U.S. states, government contractors are required to sign loyalty pledges affirming that they stand with Israel. This condition has sparked lawsuits and public outrage, as critics argue it directly undermines the First Amendment. After all, the U.S. is supposed to be a country where citizens can freely criticize foreign governments without risking their livelihood. And yet here, the simple act of refusing to pledge allegiance to another country can cost someone their job or disqualify them from state contracts. That reality has become a flashpoint for frustration. Consider how speech is treated differently depending on the target. An American citizen can criticize the president without punishment. They can insult Congress, mock the military, or denounce domestic policies. But criticizing Israel? That's where the line seems to be drawn. Suddenly, consequences appear: loss of income, professional backlash, or even being labeled anti-Semitic for questioning a government's policies. This uneven playing field feeds the perception that Israel occupies a privileged and protected position in American politics, one that shields it from criticism in ways no other nation enjoys. The controversy surrounding Charlie Kirk is just one piece of this broader puzzle. Kirk has long been outspoken in his admiration for Israel, often portraying himself as a defender of the Jewish state and a champion of its values. His speeches are filled with glowing references to visiting the Holy Land and affirmations of Israel's right to defend itself. To his supporters, this is simply the stance of a principled conservative who recognizes Israel as a key ally. But to skeptics, it looks more like a relationship built on financial dependence. And that's where the Nick Fuentes allegations hit hardest. Whether the $150 million figure is true or not almost doesn't matter. The story resonates because it fits a pattern that many already believe. Prominent conservative figures are not just influenced by Israel, they're financially tied to it. That perception alone creates distrust, not only toward the individuals involved, but toward the political system as a whole. The implications are serious. When Americans feel that their leaders are prioritizing the interests of another country over their own citizens, cynicism grows. That cynicism doesn't stay contained to policy debates. It spills over into culture, into online discourse, and into rising hostility toward Jewish communities in the U.S. The line between criticizing a foreign government and targeting an entire group of people becomes dangerously blurred. And as more creators, influencers, and politicians wade into this conversation, the risk of stoking outright anti-Semitism grows. At the same time, supporters of Israel argue that the criticism itself is misplaced. They point out that Israel is one of the few stable democracies in the Middle East, a nation that shares values with the U.S. and provides vital strategic benefits in a volatile region. From this perspective, American politicians aren't being bought, they're simply recognizing the importance of a trusted ally. But even among those who accept this argument, the question lingers: why should Americans lose jobs or contracts simply for refusing to declare loyalty to a foreign state? The issue isn't black and white, but it's becoming harder to ignore. On one hand, the U.S. Israel alliance is deeply ingrained, woven into decades of shared history, military cooperation, and political alignment. On the other hand, the perception that money and influence are silencing criticism is equally strong. For many, the Kirk controversy isn't just about one man or one organization, it's about the integrity of American democracy itself. Ultimately, what the debate reveals is a double standard. If Americans are truly committed to free speech, then it must apply across the board. That means the freedom to criticize Israel without fear, just as one can criticize any other country. It also means acknowledging when political figures, regardless of party or ideology, may be more beholden to foreign donors than to their own constituents. The Kirk story and the allegations of a $150 million promise serve as a reminder of how blurred those lines have become. Whether the claim is factual or exaggerated, it resonates because it taps into a growing unease, the sense that American voices are being shaped not by the will of the people, but by the priorities of outside powers. And until that unease is addressed, the accusations of hypocrisy, double standards, and foreign influence will only grow louder. This tension finally came to a head in the final days of Charlie Kirk's life. According to multiple reports, just 48 hours before his death, Kirk made a startling declaration. He told his colleagues at Turning Point USA, a circle of Jewish donors, and even a rabbi that he was finished supporting Israel's political agenda. After years of presenting himself as one of the strongest voices for the U.S. Israel alliance, he suddenly announced he would no longer allow himself to be pressured or bullied into positions he didn't fully believe in. For someone like Kirk, this was no small shift. His identity as a conservative leader was tied closely to his vocal support for Israel. He had built his reputation on fiery speeches about defending the Holy Land, praising its culture and positioning it as an outpost of Western civilization in the Middle East. He often told audiences that visiting Israel was one of the greatest experiences of his life, repeating that message across interviews, podcasts, and rallies. So when he reportedly told donors he was done, it was nothing short of a seismic break. What makes the moment even more striking is the timing. Kirk had been under growing criticism from within the conservative movement. Some accused him of being too entangled with foreign interests, while others questioned whether his loyalty to Israel overshadowed his loyalty to American voters. The rumors about large donations from Israeli sources only amplified the skepticism. By openly declaring that he would no longer follow Israel's agenda, Kirk seemed to be acknowledging those criticisms and perhaps attempting to reclaim his independence. He also hinted at something else, a possible reconciliation with Candace Owens, another conservative heavyweight who had clashed with him in the past. Owens had her own complicated history with Israel, at times offering sharp criticisms that put her at odds with pro-Israel donors and commentators. The idea that Kirk might realign with her suggested he was preparing for a major shift in his political alliances. Together, they could have reshaped the narrative within conservative politics, pulling it away from unquestioned support for Israel and toward a more independent stance. Under community. And here's the real question. Why does Tim Pool or anyone else think Chappelle should be off limits for speaking freely? He's a comedian. His job is to poke, provoke, and question. If criticizing America on a stage in Saudi Arabia is such a problem, then why are the same voices silent when it comes to Saudi Arabia itself, or Qatar, or any other Middle Eastern country with real restrictions? Funny enough, there's only one country that seems to set off alarms when criticized, and we all know which one that is. That's where the hypocrisy comes in. You've got guys like Tim calling Chappelle out, but at the same time, he's openly taking sides, clearly tied up in his own political and financial alignments. So who's really free to speak here? Chappelle never even mentioned Israel. He just made his joke. But the second his words brush against certain topics, the outrage machine kicks in. And the truth is, policing speech this way backfires. It doesn't silence criticism, it fuels it. That's why we're seeing a spike in open anti-Semitism across America, with creators willing to risk demonetization or bans just to say what they think. Channels are moving off YouTube, conversations are happening elsewhere, and the anger is only spreading. Then there's the wildest part. Chappelle once supposedly hinted that if he ever said the words, "I stand with Israel," a phrase he'd never normally use, it would be a sign he was being censored or pressured. That's how deeply people feel about free speech in this debate. Because if you can't openly criticize any government without fearing consequences, is that really free speech at all? At the end of the day, influencers like Tim Pool, Brandon Tatum, Candace Owens, or even Charlie Kirk himself, all of them are being paid, one way or another, to stand on different sides of the same fight. Chappelle, on the other hand, is a comedian making jokes. You don't have to like what he says, but calling him out while you're tied up in the very same political games? That just exposes your own hypocrisy. Let's be real. When you're bought and paid for, you're no longer standing with America first. You're standing with whoever signed the check. And trust me, these folks have attack dogs lined up, ready to bark at anyone who steps out of line. Take Brandon Tatum, for example. He's walking a thin line these days. Back when it was profitable to take shots at the Black community, that was his bread and butter. It sold well. It made him money. But that hustle is drying up. People are tired of hearing the same old Black fatigue content. So now, what's the new lane? Geopolitics. Talk about Palestine, talk about Israel, talk about Russia, talk about Trump's alliances. That's where the big checks come from today. Grow your platform big enough, and someone will eventually slide you a bag to stay on message. But the second you stop singing their tune, they'll turn on you in a heartbeat. And here's the difference. Dave Chappelle doesn't play that game. He can't be bought. He doesn't take orders from foreign governments, political donors, or media bosses. He says what he wants, when he wants, no matter how messy or offensive it may sound. That kind of independence terrifies people in power because it means they can't control him. And that's the bottom line. While others are busy selling their voices to the highest bidder, Chappelle remains one of the few who still speaks freely. And that's exactly why they're coming for him.